Hi everyone, my name is Payanna. So in this video I'm going to be talking about 4 books that are one-offs, standalone novels that aren't part of any series, which is kind of refreshing for me because I spend my life essentially running between one series to another, trying to catch up. It's nice sometimes to just read books and know that there's not 20 follow-up things behind them. The first book is The Mad Women's Ball by Victoria Mass. And honestly, this book made me enraged to a point that hadn't happened since I read A Mermaid in Paris by Matthias Malzieu. This book, wow. So anyway, The Mad Women's Ball tells the story of Louise, a teenager locked up in Salpêtre mental institution for women in Paris in the 1800s. We learned that her parents died in a fire and she was saved and went to live with her aunt and uncle. And when she came of age, let's say, her uncle decided to have his way with her. And because she's a member of the female gender, she got the blame for this. She also started having fits, which is why her aunt and uncle decided to have her committed. In the hospital, she serves pretty much as a guinea pig for the head doctor, who presents her in front of an audience and shows them what her fits look like. She is actually pretty happy about this. She believes that she's actually going to help science and improve her own mental health and the mental health of others who have the same condition as her by showing her symptoms and reactions to doctors and important people. We also get to meet some of the other patients of Salpêtre, and it presents a lot of problems that women face in societies in the 1800s about how when their husbands were just dissatisfied with them or wanted a new wife, or they were complaining too much, or their cooking wasn't up to standard, they could just have them sent to a mental institution, because women are all insane anyway. I really liked the aspect of this novel and how it underlined in a very visceral way the problems that women faced back in the 1800s and how a lot of these problems are still around today. Obviously now it's harder to commit a woman to a mental asylum if she is upset about her husband having an affair, but there are still a lot of issues that women have in society, like not being taken seriously at work, or just not being taken seriously, full stop, or being blamed for sexual assaults, the whole bloody debate about what clothes we are or aren't allowed to wear, the sodding burkini controversy is coming up in France once again, and nobody seems to realise that this is a smokescreen for something bigger. But yeah, let's just take women's clothes and use that as a smokescreen, like, ugh. So all of this aspect of this book I actually really enjoyed, and I was like, yes, we need more books like this. This book was immensely popular when it was first published in France. It was very well received, everyone loved it, and at first, reading the story of Louise, I was like, yes, this is brilliant. I understand why everyone loves this book. It's very well written. It really underlines women's problems in society for the last 200 years. Give me more. And then it switches to the story of Eugenie. Eugenie is also a teenager who lives in a rather wealthy family, and she is very upset because her brothers are encouraged by their father to study science, to debate, to learn about politics, about the runnings of the world, about business, and she also would really like to learn these things. But her father's like, no, you're a girl, your job is to go and get married and you don't have a say in it. She ends up convincing her brother to take her to one of his meetings with his sciencey academia philosopher friends and attend their discussion. Now, I thought that this part of the story concerning Eugenie would be about her fighting to get an education as a woman, to do basically what Marie Curie did, maybe going to underground universities, trying to prove herself as a woman with a brain, because God forbid, in a world filled with men, fighting for her right for an education and knowledge, and to be something more than just a womb for producing children. And that her family would get her committed because of this, because she's being so unwomanly and women shouldn't want to learn stuff. So they'd send her to the asylum. That's not what happens. She can see ghosts. So at first I thought this is going to be something about, some kind of hallucination or chemical imbalance in her brain or something. No, she can actually see ghosts for real. Ghosts are real in this book, and she proves it to her grandmother that she can see her grandfather's ghost, and he knows where this pendant of hers is that she thought had been stolen, but actually it had slipped between two floorboards or something, and she retrieves it for her, and her grandmother gets her committed because of this. Thank you for finding my pendant. Now you're going to go to a mental health institution. Oh my god, I hated that. I hated that so much. It really made me angry because I'm like, yes, I like supernatural, I like fantasy, put this in books and I will read them, and I loved it. But in this context, in the context of a book which is underlining a problem in society that has been going on for centuries, and that is still an issue today, and just throwing in some bloody ghost story? What's the fucking point? It made everything, just Victoria Mass's writing lose all of its credibility. And presenting something that is so real, that is so important, that has so many repercussions in our society, and then being like, oh yeah, here's this girl, she can see ghosts. Anger unbridled. I hate it. I hate it so much, and it really makes me angry because the whole aspect of the unfairness of how women were treated then and are still treated today was so good, and a lot of research went into it. Clearly she did a lot of research about this, and then the stuff about ghosts, which she also clearly did a lot of research into, because she cites books at the time about ghosts and the whole seances things and how that started. It's a bloody scam. It's always been a scam. The people who created it knew that it was a scam. Oh god, I can't believe this, but I read Loki, Where Mischief Lies by Mackenzi Lee. Actually is a fantasy novel, and there's a scene in that where a woman who performs seances actually does explain how everything works, how all the ghosts actually work and what she does to pretend, and with trapped doors and chemicals and stuff. Ask a Mortician has a video where she also explains how seances worked, which I'll link in the description because I think it's really, I love Ask a Mortician. I love her channel, Caitlin. She's also a really good writer. Brilliant. So I'll link that below. But yeah, I was so mad about that, and the book goes on, but the doctor is organising a ball for the women, and they all get to choose their costumes and put on a show for Parisian guys, and they're all really happy about this, but turns out it's just him conducting another experiment, and the controversy of this. I did kind of think that was interesting because it was a thing back then to kind of exhibit mental health patients as just that, exhibits, things to be looked at, things to utilize as amusement and entertainment. But through these observations made by doctors, this was the beginning of learning and understanding about mental health to get to what we know today. So it is. And the same thing goes for medicine, fixing broken limbs. Before, it was you would tie someone to a table and hack it off with a saw. The thing was, we had to go through this process in order to get to the medical knowledge that we have today. And as someone who suffers from mental health problems, it's dark. It's the dark history of medicine as a whole. But it was a sort of necessary process. Reading about the kind of pros and cons and the controversy and results of this was interesting, but again, the whole thing about the ghosts blew it out of the water for me. I hated it. So yeah, a really very potentially brilliant novel completely annihilated by its supernatural content. So yeah, the Mad Woman's Ball by Victoria Mass, probably one of the books I hate the most, especially among those I read this year. Who Fears Death by Nnedi Okorafor. This book, one of the ones that I read at the beginning of the year, and I found it absolutely impossible to put down. It is a dystopian, futuristic novel set in Africa, which is interesting, because Africa is already kind of a dystopian world, at least in some parts of it. I think it's wonderful now that we have such a wider variety of fantasy coming from, there's a lot coming from China right now. We're getting a lot of Chinese-inspired Chinese writers and descendants of Chinese families writing fantasy right now. There's a lot of that. China seems to be super popular, which is great for me because I love Chinese fantasy for 20 years now, and it was hard to come by at one point. But yeah, disregarding that, we are getting more from Africa. Ben Okri and Octavia E. Butler were like the only Afro-American / African authors that were like sort of into fantasy. Octavia E. Butler definitely, Ben Okri dabbled, but this book is just brilliant. So it tells the story of a girl called Onye Sonwoo, who is half caste, and which is referred to as Ewu in this universe. And Ewu are considered to be demon children, so if anyone is half caste, they are not accepted in the society. Her mother became pregnant as a result of forced intercourse with a man, and with a white man, and she raised her child in the desert at first. So they spent first number of years in the desert, and at some point she is forced to re-enter society, where Onye Sonwoo discovers that she has magical abilities and she can transform into a bird, into a vulture. She goes to their local magician, I guess, and asks to learn magic, but he refuses on the grounds that she's a girl and she shouldn't be allowed to. But she keeps coming back and keeps insisting until the point where she magically attacks him and sends him into the other world, where she overpowers him. And turns out the reason he didn't want to train women is because they are so powerful and he is afraid of their power. It brings up a lot of interesting aspects about the powers that women have and why they have been so repressed. The grand theme of this is the power of creation. Like, she has the power to create life. I think it's interesting because, especially after reading the Mad Women's Ball, which makes a point about how women are treated in society and tries to like work in some elements of fantasy, but it just doesn't work. This book absolutely does, even though it's a fantasy novel. So I think it's a really great example of how to utilize the unfairness in which women are treated in society into a fantasy novel by taking a theme that is very subtle at first. It doesn't come out, but there is a lot about women's sexuality. This book is so brilliant. Like, I just loved it so much. And as I said, it was impossible to put down. I don't even want to kind of describe it too precisely because it is so strange. But the one thing that I did really want to talk about is the whole thing about her being able to transform into a vulture. I didn't really think anything of this. I was just like, okay, she has this power, she can turn into a vulture. But I work with this guy from Mali who once told us this story about when he was a kid, he and his mates found an owl with an earring. And they knew that this owl was a wizard, because wizards in certain parts of African folklore apparently can turn into birds. And so this owl had an earring, which was the evidence that it was a wizard. And so he and his mates decided to shoot it with a slingshot so that it didn't hurt anyone else with its horrible magic. And I was so blown away by this because, you know, I just read this book like, to me, this was a fantasy novel. Yeah, okay, it's about a girl who can turn into a bird. But to my coworker, this is real. Like, this stuff is real. Like, wizards who can turn into birds will really exist and are dangerous. I just love that. It really kind of gave this book a whole new dimension. I haven't even talked about it with him. Maybe I should. Or maybe I'll freak him out. I don't know. I'll talk to him about it, see what he thinks. But yeah, that was really incredible to me. So yeah, Who Fears Death by Nnedi Okorafor. Brilliant fantasy novel, African culture, beautiful. The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. So yeah, I know everyone's read this book, but what can I say? I'm late on the bandwagon. So this book is set in Victorian times, and it tells the story of two rival magicians who both enter into a competition children. They both raise a student, teach them about magic, the point being for them to go face to face with their magic abilities into the world, and one is supposed to defeat the other, and whichever one wins. First contestant decides to put forward his own daughter, his logic being she has his blood and she is naturally good at magic, so she'll obviously win. And the other guy's counter argument is that he could just take a random kid off the street, and if he trains in the right way, then he can defeat her. So this is how both of these children are raised for about 20 years, at which point one of the members of high London society decides to create the night circus, in which the girl, Celia, becomes an illusionist, and the boy, Marco, works on the outside, living in London with the creator of the circus, but influences and creates attractions from the outside. The book takes place over rather a long period of time. It kind of follows their dueling, I guess. Like, she will create something amazing, then he'll create something amazing, and how they respect each other's work, how they eventually find out that they're in a competition that will end with one of them defeating the other. They don't really know what the rules are, they don't know why they're in this. And when they find out what is exactly at stake, things happen, basically. And what I really liked about this book is the fact that it's non-violent. Like, there are certain violent scenes in it, but they're not like fighting in a violent way. It's just creating beautiful attractions, and their duel involves creation and beauty, just being magical, and how they admire each other's work and move forward to inspire themselves from it and create something new, especially within the context of the circus. The circus ends up having very specific followers known as rêveurs, dreamers, who kind of follow the circus wherever it goes, and again just lends this entirely magical element in its own, like people who are so transported by the circus that they will actually go out of their way to follow it around and become like a part of it in their own individual way, because the circus can't exist if it doesn't have an audience, if people don't go to it. And just intertwining the different aspects of how a circus works, and how just the whole universe centered around an actual magical circus. And obviously they fall in love eventually, and that was kind of predictable. And I normally get annoyed with like predictable love stories, the kind of, you know that these characters are going to end up together at the beginning, but in this book I will completely forgive it. It was so beautiful from beginning to end. It's so magical. It takes you into a completely different world where you really wish that the night circus really did exist, and that we really could go there, because it is timeless and magical and beautiful and wonderful. Did I like this book? Yeah, I think I did. Do I recommend it? Absolutely. I one of my favourite books I've read this year, definitely. And I understand completely why everyone loves it so much. So, The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. And finally, Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. This book came out quite recently. It's a fantasy novel about time travel and the issues of time travel. It's interesting the way it's kind of strung together, because at the beginning we just get scenes with various characters in different timelines. So you've got one in 1912, you've got one in 2020, you've got one in 2203, and one in 2401. And at the beginning, they witness strange occurrences, odd things happen, but they basically just get on with it. And it's a slow burn, this book. It takes a while to kind of figure out how everything ties together, but I really love books that are written that way. Like I said, it's a bit abstract at the beginning, like who are these people, what are they doing here, why are they here, and just as the book goes on to see how everything intertwines and comes together, I think it's a very clever way of writing. I absolutely adored that. The book kind of has three main themes to it. The first one being time travel, as I said. The second one being pandemics. This was presumably written during the pandemic. The C word pandemic, not that C word, the other C word. The C word pandemic. And the other one being the simulation theory. Are we living in a simulation? And I thought it was interesting. The whole time travel one really comes together in quite an interesting way. It's not, I'm not going to say it's innovative, because I have seen and read concepts like this before, but the whole way it was handled, I like the time travel aspect of it. Also the pandemic aspect of it, because it keeps coming up. The first time we have a mention of at the end of 2019, the time traveler asks, "Oh, how's everything going with the C virus?" And everyone's like, "What?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, it's not happened yet." So we get the C virus. We get the character who lives in 1912 ends up going through World War I, so obviously has to deal with the Spanish flu. In 2203, there's, I think it's SARS outbreak, which again has a huge impact on the population. And one of the characters who is supposed to die in the pandemic but doesn't. There's a scene that I particularly liked where the time traveler Gaspari goes to a party. I think it's in like the early 2000s. And everybody's kissing and hugging, and he's so shocked by this and being like, "Oh God, you've never lived through a pandemic. Why are you kissing and hugging?" And I have to admit, I do think it's odd now, especially in France, where we're all supposed to kiss each other to say hello. And I always hated doing that for that specific reason, because you don't know what that person is carrying. Like, you don't know if they've had the flu, or what they've got, what kind of viruses or bacteria they've got floating around them. So I always hated kissing people. And also shaking hands, another one. Like, I know for a fact that a lot of my co-workers don't wash their hands after going to the toilet, so I'm perfectly okay with fist bumping forever. But the other day I went to a restaurant, and just seeing people kissing again, like, "Oh, now lockdown's over, now we don't need to wear masks anymore, we can all go back to kissing each other." I'm like, have you not been alive for the last 2 years? Please don't kiss each other. Just don't wash your hands, don't kiss each other, and fist bump. Please. There's a character who's a writer called Olive, and I really liked her. I mean, she's one of the characters where you really like, what is she doing right now? She's the one she's on a book tour in 2203, and so it's very futuristic. We've got like new concepts for book tours for traveling. It is still quite similar to the world we live in today, which I thought was interesting, because everyone is like, "Oh, well, we'll have flying cars," or like in The Fifth Element, or we'll have hoverboards like in Back to the Future. But technology, even though it does move very fast, doesn't move that fast. Like, we have got some of the technologies that were predicted by sci-fi creators back in the day, but not all of them. We haven't colonized space yet, so that does happen in 2203 in this world. The moon has been colonized, and in 2401 other parts of the galaxy have been colonized. Colonizing space does eventually happen in this book, but when Olive is in like taxis in Paris, it still remains relatable. Like, there are still taxis in Paris, there are still taxis wherever she goes. And she gives talks about pandemics, because she wrote a book which ends up being super popular, which is why she's on this book tour, which is about a pandemic, and she ends up being caught in a pandemic, and she gives speeches about pandemics. When I say pandemics it's a very big theme in this novel. It definitely is. And there's also a part later on about lockdown, when she ends up in lockdown with her daughter and her husband, which again, even though it's happening in such a far-flung future, it's also very relatable. Pandemics is something, like, as you listen to her speeches about how smallpox came to the Americas before it got to the Americas, before the European population got immune to it, it also had to come to Europe during the Roman Empire. And going back in history and just bringing up this point that, hey, pandemics have always been a thing throughout human history. Let's not forget that. Remember the 3 rules: wash your hands, don't kiss, and fist bump. The last theme in this book is simulation theory, which pops up now and again, and there are occasional arguments about it. Like, one of the characters claims that they can't be living in a simulation because, like, stuff doesn't work, like all the street lights don't work, and, you know, if they were in a simulation, everything would be perfect. Gaspari at the end decides that it doesn't matter whether or not they're in a simulation, because they're still having a life and living and being themselves, so it doesn't matter. But it also, like, the whole time travel aspect, like it revolves around a rip in space-time where several times like juxtapose with each other. That was also what kind of lends to the argument about maybe we're living in a simulation because there's a glitch in the program being the simulation. But it's never really gone into in any great detail. So I still have questions about the whole simulation aspect. It's an argument that kind of flutters backwards and forwards, but never really goes anywhere, which I thought was a shame. There could have been an exploration of the simulation theory. I don't know. I don't really know where that could have gone. The prose in this book is glorious. I really liked Emily St. John Mandel's writing style. I also really liked how the perspective from the characters from different times is completely different and does completely fit in with their times and what they know and what they believe is possible or not and what they relate to. And there's this great scene here where Gasperi, who has always lived on the moon, is walking through a forest. He was very still, listening. Another thing he didn't like about forests was the constant sound. It wasn't the steady white noise of the moon cities, the distant mechanicals that increased the gravity to Earth levels and kept the air inside the domes breathable and created the illusion of a breeze. There was no pattern to the white noise of the forest, and the randomness put Gasperi on edge. Time passed, hours. His muscles cramped. He was desperately thirsty. He stood a few times to stretch, then crouched low again. It was impossible to hear anything coming until it wasn't. Just little paragraphs like that I found extremely pleasing. It's brilliant. I really enjoyed this book, Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. It is really a tranquil novel. That's what it is. It deserves its name, Sea of Tranquility, which is a part of the moon, by the way. But yeah, it definitely does what it says on the cover. So that's it for this video. Don't hesitate to tell me what you thought if you've read any of these books, how you felt about them. If you think that I am wrong in every possible way, you are welcome to say so. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye bye.